Defensive abilities are powers specifically created to protect their users from harm. This is done in unique ways depending on the character. So this had me wondering, which defensive ability is the greatest in fiction? Now I know I said fiction, but just be aware that I haven't actually read every piece of media in fiction. So if your favorite character, like I don't know, Frank, isn't on here, don't get on my ass. Also, I'm ranking these characters based on their effectiveness of protecting their users and their weaknesses they have. So, if your favorite ability isn't number 1, it doesn't mean it's weak or anything like that. One more thing, I'm only ranking the abilities themselves, not necessarily the wielders, as anyone can make a terrible ability greater. Anyways, let's begin. Makima made a contract with the Prime Minister of Japan that ties the lifespans of every citizen within Japan to her own. So basically, if Makima dies at any point in a battle, she'll be revived, and that death will be given to a random citizen in Japan. This makes her technically immortal, as Japan has a population of 125 million people, meaning you have to kill her that many times to defeat her for good. However, there's two issues. It's not too difficult to kill her that many times if the opponent is many times stronger than she is. Second, she can still be erased from existence. Bartolomeo can create an indestructible barrier by simply crossing his fingers. Nothing can bypass this barrier, not even attacks that can destroy entire buildings and city blocks. The barrier can also be used to protect his allies as well. There's a variety of other uses. As long as his hands are crossed, nothing can damage him. But this is a double-edged sword. If his hands are uncrossed for any reason, or if his fingers are incapacitated for whatever reason, he's pretty much a goner.
Dirty deeds done dirt cheap.
The 4C Love Train creates a golden barrier or light that redirects any attack or damage to another point in space and time. When a bullet, punch, explosion hit the golden light, it will be converted into bad fortune or karma and be transferred into the past or future. This bad fortune will then manifest as a calamity for someone else. Damage done to Valentine can also be healed and sent somewhere else. One of the most glaring weaknesses of this ability is the fact that the light isn't fully tied to the user. It's kinda like a spotlight they have to stay within. So Valentine needs to leave the light in order to attack. Its weakness is also easily figured out by Gyro, and the simple control of gravity can tear it apart and bypass its defense. No intelligence is required for this ability, but its limitations are hard to ignore. King Crimson allows Diavolo to erase the time between the present moment and a point in the future, typically around 10 seconds. During this erased time, everyone except Diavolo is unaware of what happens within this erased time, essentially skipping over these moments. Diavolo is essentially invincible within erased time, as any attack simply passes through him. Diavolo can see into the future by 10 seconds. This allows him to predict the actions of his opponents during that brief time frame. This ability is incredibly easy to use, but there's one huge problem. Despite being confusing to the opponent, they can eventually figure out its inner workings and outsmart Diavolo or counter him. He's essentially a sitting duck when the ability runs its course. Epitaph is useful, but it's not passive, meaning Diavolo has to go out of his way to check it every time. Certain abilities can also override it, such as Silver Chariot Requiem and Gold Experience Requiem. Gojo can create a barrier of infinite distance by dividing the space between him and an opponent, so attacks are moving towards him but infinitely slow down and never reach him. However, within the context of the JJK universe, there's many ways to bypass the barrier. Domain expansion, domain amplification, Mahoraga, cursed tools, space cutting. There's also the fact that this ability is essentially worthless without the 6 eyes, making the Limitless incredibly powerful, but also flawed due to the sheer amount of weaknesses. Avalon works by shielding its wielder in another dimension, making whoever holds it invincible from all forms of attack. It even blocked another divine weapon which can rip apart time, space, and dimensions infinite in size. It also has potent healing abilities. The only problem with Avalon is that it's technically a physical, intangible object that can be stolen, which has happened at some point in the past. So if this occurs, Saber is essentially robbed of a conceptual defense. Just like Gojo, Green Baby's stand ability works by dividing based on distance. This time, the closer you move to the baby, the smaller you get, with your size being proportional to the distance from the baby. When you move closer to the baby, you'll shrink infinitely until you no longer exist. The baby and the objects it throws can also become larger, so attacks like projectiles would never reach it, as they'll shrink infinitely until they cease to exist. There isn't any known weaknesses to this ability, but it doesn't have a ton of offensive options. Encounter can redirect any harm, both physical and mental, that's inflicted upon him to another location, which means he won't be harmed by any attack, no matter how quick or how many there are. He specifies the location, which might be anything from other individuals to structures, and the damage reflected is proportional to the attack that was launched. Even his own death can be pushed away, which obviously will instantly kill anyone or anything his death was pushed to. Encounter also has a defensive ability that stops attacks in their tracks. This ability has no notable weaknesses, but its offensive potential is also low. Regulus's Authority of Greed completely shuts him off from the world's flow of time, and thus his body cannot be influenced by the outside world in any way. This makes him a living anomaly. Any attack launched at him will still hit him most of the time, but he'll take 0 damage. This is regardless of the force or speed of the attack. Once they make contact with him, it's like his body didn't even realize he got hit. Regulus can apply this ability to anything in the world, pretty much making it a deadly weapon that tears apart anything they touch. There's one aspect of the authority that gives it one extra layer of defense, and that is the shifting of Regulus's heart. I won't go into detail, but all you need to know is that Regulus's heart is the reason he can use his ability for so long, and his heart can transfer itself to any living thing that exists. It doesn't matter who or where, theoretically within the range of the entire universe, as long as his heart exists. Regulus is invincible. The only reason Regulus lost was because of his stupid mistake of placing his heart within Emilia, within the vicinity of the one guy who not only knew how his power worked, but had the ability to control souls. Kumagawa's All Fiction has the power to erase anything from reality by turning them into fiction. He erased color from the universe, his injuries, his own death, eyesight, humans, and concepts. This ability only requires a thought to activate. Its only weakness is another ability that could nullify or ignore his ability. If it wasn't for that one specific power, there's basically nothing that can hurt Kumagawa, and he can basically just turn his opponents and their attacks into fiction. GER can revert anything to 0, including his opponent's actions, such as their abilities. Giorno does not need to consciously be aware of the ability, as it will activate automatically whenever he's in any direct harm. So no matter what, the attacks sent Giorno's way will be returned to 0, cursing his opponents to repeat their fated actions. Accelerator can control any and all vectors. Vectors are mathematical quantities representing both magnitude and direction. Basically everything in the universe has a vector, which means Accelerator is invincible from all forms of harm known to man and even God. Anything that touches Accelerator's reflection barrier will instantly be reflected, making it incredibly dangerous to even attack him. He can also mess with the vectors of anything he touches, giving him a ton of versatility. The ability has infinite ways it can evolve due to the complex nature of vector quantities, And again, they exist within everything. Its only weakness is the Imagine Breaker, theoretically an attack with 0 vectors, basically a scalar, and a short window in its reflection. But only really one man knows this, and Wonder Review controls Calamity, which pretty much means the entire world, and even existence itself, will protect Toru from harm, regardless of the attack's speed, power, or nature. It utilizes everything, and I mean everything, including your own abilities, your friends, your weaknesses, anything under heaven and earth to attack you. Things become illogical, and the world will bend the very way it works to ensure you're 6 feet underground. Better yet, Toru literally does not have to do anything. He can just sit in one spot, and his ability will take care of everyone of his opposition. The only thing that can bypass Calamity is an attack that doesn't exist in the world, but even the individuals that possess such an ability almost died in his battle, and Wonder Review can actually be permanently destroyed, as Calamity exists everywhere and is literally an aspect of the logic and reason of the world. Honorable mentions would include Mahoraga, who can adapt to any and all phenomena once the wheel on his back turns, although it needs to survive the attack. Second honorable mention is Akka, which can absorb an attack and release that attack back at Chihiro's opponents. This ability is still in its infancy, but will continue to grow in strength. What can I say? SCP-682 is by far one of the most dangerous entities in all of fiction, and that is simply because of its ability to adapt to anything you throw at it. Once it sees or experiences any phenomena, it will develop some sort of counter to it. If it gets erased from existence, it will adapt and come back to reality. If it gets thrown into another dimension, it'll adapt and teleport back to our world. If you make a creature specifically tailored to kill it, it'll adapt and counter it. Nothing, and I truly mean nothing, can bypass its adaptation. If I threw 682 against every other character on this list, it will likely adapt to 100% of them, and either bypass or be completely immune to their skill set. I won't go in detail, but all you have to know is when it comes to whoever has the best defensive ability in fiction, the award goes to SCP-682.